All right, so today we're diving deep into online romance scams,
Hmm.
but with a twist. We're looking at a National Geographic video that goes behind the scenes with an investigative journalist, and well, it really reveals a whole new layer to this.
Yeah, this deep dive is taking us to Ghana. Not exactly the first place you think of when you think about romance scams, right? But this video shows it's a hub. And not just any hub. It's got a really unexpected twist that kind of flips our assumptions about who the victims and the scammers really are.
Ghana. That wasn't on my bingo card for this either. But you're right, there's a big twist. The scammers in this video are mostly men, and they're targeting other men.
Exactly. It really challenges that common narrative, doesn't it? It raises so many questions like, why is this dynamic happening? And why don't we hear more about these stories? The video profiles two scammers in particular. They call themselves the Punisher and Miami Queen. And they've got this bait and switch tactic that's pretty interesting.
The Punisher and Miami Queen. Okay, now you've got my attention. What is this bait and switch all about?
So the Punisher, he starts by connecting with potential victims online, building up that rapport, lots of text messages, laying on the charm. But when it comes time for a video call, he hands the phone off to Miami Queen, his female accomplice. That way they can keep the illusion going.
Wow. So it's like they're putting on a whole performance. It's kind of unsettling how calculated it all is. What surprised me was how widespread this seems to be. They say they have hundreds of friends doing the same thing.
Right. This isn't just a few bad apples. It seems like a whole network operating in Ghana, preying on people seeking connection online. Makes you think about the dark side of the digital world. And it makes you wonder what drives them.
Yeah. What's the motivation here? Is it just about the money? Or is there something more to it?
Well, the video gives us some clues. They boast about the money they're making, showing off their expensive purchases and lavish lifestyles.
Really? Boasting about scamming? That just seems so strange to me.
It is complex, isn't it? Makes you think about societal pressures. Is it a way to gain status or respect? Maybe in a community where traditional economic opportunities are limited. Or maybe it's a way to justify their actions.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, it's not an excuse, but it adds another layer to understanding their motivations. But how are they technically pulling this off? Creating fake personas, maintaining this illusion. It all seems pretty sophisticated.
Well, that's where things get intriguing. The video shows they actually have a good deal of technical savvy. For instance, they rely heavily on text communication at first, building trust and intimacy through words. But even when they do video calls, those are carefully staged.
Staging, what do I mean?
One of the scammers admitted to buying pre-recorded videos of women online, and then during a call, he just plays these videos, he stays silent. But the victim thinks they're actually interacting with the real woman.
No way. The journalist got them to admit to that.
Yeah. She gained their trust over time, and they opened up about their methods. It's fascinating, but also a little unnerving to see how they're exploiting technology like that. And when it comes to payment, they're not picky. Wire transfers, gift cards, cash, Bitcoin. They're using all the latest tools.
It's scary how organized it all is. This video focuses on men being the targets, which is unusual. Did they say why they choose to target men specifically?
They did. They claim that men are generally easier to scam, especially those who might be lonely or looking for companionship.
That's a chilling observation. It makes you wonder if there are certain societal pressures or expectations that make someone more vulnerable. And I read that, statistically, far fewer men report being victims of romance scams compared to women.
That's true. It makes you wonder if there's shame or stigma preventing men from coming forward. Maybe they feel like they should have seen it coming, or they're embarrassed to admit they were fooled. But it's important to remember that anyone can fall victim to these scams, regardless of gender. We need to create a space where people feel safe talking about it.
Absolutely. The emotional impact can be devastating. You're not just losing money. You're losing trust, feeling betrayed, questioning your own judgment.
It's a lot to process, and it raises some bigger ethical and societal implications. We're not just talking about individual harm. We're talking about eroding trust in online spaces, fueling this culture of deception, and maybe even reinforcing harmful stereotypes. It makes you think about the role of these platforms, the dating apps and websites where these interactions are happening.
Yeah. Do they have any responsibility to protect their users from this?
That's a big question, and it's one we'll be diving into in the next part of our deep dive. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Yeah, it's easy to just focus on the scammers and how they deceive people. But you're right, we can't ignore the platforms themselves. The dating apps and websites, where these interactions are taking place, do they have a responsibility to protect their users? That's the big question. So let's unpack that a bit. What kind of responsibility do these dating apps and websites actually have? I mean, it's a tough one, right? They're providing a service, they're connecting people, but they're also profiting from those connections.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. On the one hand, they can't be held accountable for every single interaction that happens. They aren't actively endorsing these scams, but
But they do want their platform to be seen as safe and trustworthy. If people are constantly getting scammed, that's going to damage their reputation
yeah,
and their bottom line.
exactly. And there are things they can do to reduce the risk, like stricter verification processes to weed out fake profiles, sophisticated algorithms to detect suspicious activity,
Hmm.
and education.
Educating their users about the dangers of romance scams.
Education seems huge. If people know the red flags, the tactics that these scammers use, they're more likely to spot them and avoid becoming victims.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power in these situations, but it's not just about individual responsibility. We need to think about the wider societal context too. What might be contributing to this problem? What do you mean by that? How does society play a role?
Well, think about it. We live in a culture that glorifies hustle culture, this idea of pursuing wealth no matter what. It can create an environment where scamming, even in its most harmful forms, is seen as a viable way to get ahead.
So it's like the ends justify the means, even if it means exploiting vulnerable people.
It is. And this mentality can be even stronger in areas with limited economic opportunities. Again, it doesn't excuse their actions, but it helps us understand the factors that contribute to it.
So we need to look at the root causes, not just the symptoms, but how do we even begin to tackle something this complex?
It's definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible. It requires a multifaceted approach. We need stronger law enforcement to crack down on these scams, international cooperation to track down the perpetrators, and big education campaigns to raise awareness.
And we need to address those underlying societal issues, like loneliness, isolation, economic disparity, the things that make people vulnerable to these scams in the first place.
Exactly. We need to build a society where people feel connected and supported, where they have access to opportunities, where they don't feel so desperate that they fall prey to these scams.
That's a tall order. It's almost like we need a cultural shift.
It might sound idealistic, but I do think it's possible. We've seen cultural shifts before. It takes collective effort and a recognition that this is a problem worth solving.
It's a good reminder that these scams aren't happening in isolation. They reflect our society, our values, our vulnerabilities. Addressing them means looking inward as well as outward. But in all of this, let's not forget the human element. The emotional toll on the victims is huge.
You're right. We've talked about the financial losses, but the emotional damage can be even worse. Imagine thinking you found love, sharing your deepest feelings and secrets, only to find out it was all a lie.
It's heartbreaking. The betrayal, the humiliation, the loss of trust.
And many victims blame themselves, thinking, how could I have been so stupid? Which makes the pain even worse. That's why it's crucial to create a safe space for victims, so they can come forward and share their stories. Seek support without judgment.
So with all this in mind, can we still find genuine connections online? Or is it just too risky, a minefield of deception waiting to happen?
It's a question many people are wrestling with, and it's one we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. Don't lose hope just yet.
I mean, after really diving into these scams, it can be a little disheartening. Can you really find genuine connections online? Or should we all just delete our dating apps and accept being alone?
I get it. It's a valid question. I don't think we need to completely abandon online dating, but we do need to be cautious and aware. The internet has opened up so many ways to connect with people, but like anything else, it can be used for good or bad. It's all about being informed.
So what can we do to protect ourselves? Any practical tips for navigating this digital dating world without always looking over our shoulder?
Well, the first thing is, trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't ignore those red flags. One of the biggest ones is if someone wants to move the conversation off the platform right away, scammers often try to get you onto a different messaging app or email where there's less oversight.
Right, so if they're asking for your WhatsApp or Telegram number right away,
Mhm.
be careful. I guess it makes sense. It's easier to hide in the shadows.
Exactly. Another red flag is when they use overly romantic or intense language really early on. Big declarations of love, the whirlwind romance. That's often a tactic to cloud your judgment. Take your time getting to know someone. Don't rush.
Like the old saying, if it seems too good to be true, it probably is. But what about those requests for money? That's usually a dead giveaway. But these scammers can be creative with their sob story.
Oh, absolutely. They know how to play on your empathy, family emergencies, medical bills, travel expenses, anything to tug at your heartstrings and make you feel like you have to help.
So what should you do if you see these red flags?
First of all, don't be afraid to end the conversation. You don't need to explain yourself if you feel pressured or uncomfortable. Just block them and move on. And report their profile to the platform. They need to know what's happening.
It's a good reminder that we have the power to protect ourselves. It's not about being afraid, it's about being smart.
Exactly. We need to balance our desire for connection with the need for protection. It's like learning to swim. You don't just stay out of the water because there might be sharks. You learn about the dangers. You take precautions. And you swim with confidence.
That's a great analogy. But sometimes, even when you're careful, things happen. What advice would you give to someone who's already been scammed?
Well, the most important thing is know that you're not alone. And it's not your fault. These scammers are experts at manipulation. They prey on good people. Don't blame yourself. Reach out for support. Friends, family, a therapist. There are also organizations specifically for victims of romance scams. We'll link to some of those in the show notes.
Right. It's so important to remember there's help out there. And you can heal.
Exactly. And for everyone out there dating online, remember that real connection is still possible. Don't let these scams make you lose hope. Or become cynical. Be smart. Be cautious. But don't be afraid to open yourself up to love.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want listeners to remember?
The internet is a powerful tool, but it's up to us to use it wisely. Be knowledgeable. Be aware. Trust your gut. Stay informed. Be vigilant. And remember, you're not alone.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive. It's been eye-opening. And for everyone listening, stay safe out there in the digital world. We'll see you next time.